The parchments, remember, told us that the treasure, whatever that might have been, belonged to Dagobert II. But there was also another and much longer hidden message that talked about the famous 17th century painter Nicolas Poussin. You'll find all the details of that extraordinary code in the Holy Place. The new Poussin message refers directly to a shepherdess, and so links with his most famous painting, The Shepherds of Arcadia. And de Sède, the author of the original little paperback which had set me off on this trail, had said that Saunière had bought a copy of this painting. Back in 1971, when I was working on the first film,
Shepherdess, no temptation, to which Poussin Teniers hold the key, Peace 681. By the cross and this horse of God, I complete this Démon guardian at midday blue apples. The message may now be readable, but what does it mean? Much of it I am still unable to explain, but I can clarify one part, which takes us right away from our mountaintop village. The cipher names two painters of the 17th century, Poussin and Teniers. How can they hold the key? Can the words lead us to specific paintings by these artists? Shepherdess and Temptation. In fact, Shepherdess is a simple link to Poussin's Berger d'Arcadie, the Shepherds of Arcadia, which hangs here in the Louvre in Paris. A shepherdess, in the company of three shepherds, contemplates a tomb in a pastoral idyllic landscape. On the tomb is written the inscription, Et in Arcadia ego. Even in Arcady, I, death, am present. Within sight of the graveyard of Rennes-le-Château is this strange structure. It is the tomb of Poussin's painting. Even the round stone on which the shepherd rests his foot is still in its place. Art historians have always thought that this tomb and landscape were imaginary. But can they be right? The match is precise, except that the mountain to the left of this rocky crag rises gently, but in the painting it falls. I shall come back to this later. Nearby is the hilltop on which are the ruins of the Château of Blanchefort, and it is accurately reproduced in the painting. And the most amazing detail, as we stand before the tomb, on the horizon to the right is a small hill, exactly placed by Poussin. It is the hill of Rennes-le-Château.
if there's one thing that makes me really angry about the lunacies which have been heaped upon the story of Rennes-le-Château, it's the unscrupulous greed of the so-called treasure hunters. When I first began filming this story, I was being carefully watched, though I didn't know it. Some gold-crazed cretin was certain that I was obsessed with treasure as he was. He was also certain that I was nearer to the treasure than he was. After our first morning of filming, we broke for lunch. But this mindless idiot, thinking that filming was as brief a procedure as taking a snapshot, thought that we'd finished. When we returned to continue working, he'd already attempted to break into the tomb. Over the years, more and more stupid assaults were made on the structure, until at last a maniac tried explosives. In 1988, not surprisingly, the owner eventually sledgehammered the tomb out of existence. But even with the tomb gone, nothing can alter the landscape. And of course it's much more important than just a possible hiding place for a treasure. Once we'd found out that the tomb wasn't imaginary, as the experts would have us believe, but was this very real location, I began to look at the painting much more carefully. It was then that I discovered the geometry. It's quite simple to find, although there are so-called experts who insist it isn't there. They just haven't looked.
Could our mystery really involve Poussin? One curious, oblique piece of evidence does show up. A letter. It was addressed to Nicolas Fouquet, who was superintendent of finances in the court of Louis XIV. Sent by his brother, who had just paid a visit to Poussin in Rome. It's dated the 17th of April, 1656. Now, this letter has never been fully understood, and in part it says this: "He and I discussed certain things, which I shall with ease be able to explain to you in detail. Things which will give you, through Monsieur Poussin, advantages which even kings would have great pains to draw from him, and which, according to him, it is possible that nobody else will ever rediscover in the centuries to come. And what is more, these are things so difficult to discover that nothing now on this earth can prove of better fortune, nor be its equal." So Poussin had a secret which kings would have pains to draw from him. Was it the secret of Rennes-le-Château? Certainly the link is there, and it is made by his shepherds of Arcadia. Of all his works, it is this one which is reproduced, sculpted in stone, here on his tomb in Rome. Poussin's secret. It was in following that trail that I began to question whether the mystery of Rennes-le-Château could be simply one of a treasure hidden in a small French village. For that trail led me far from Rennes-le-Château and to a most unexpected place, Shugborough Hall, in Staffordshire, in England. Here, in the grounds, is another Berger d'Arcadie in stone. But this time, the figures are reversed mirror fashion, and underneath there is a cipher. No one has ever satisfactorily explained the meaning of these letters. This strange monument was erected in the 18th century, and no one could tell me exactly why. Might not the search for some hidden significance be inflating a simple coincidence into a bizarre extension of the mystery of Rennes-le-Château? The simple answer to that question would have been yes, if Shugborough had not also held another vital link in our chain of clues. Poussin's Et in Arcadia ego theme seems to have had significance here. In the house is a copy, not of the painting we have seen in the Louvre, but of another version which he painted some 10 years before. The original painting from which this copy was made is in the collection of the Duke of Devonshire at Chatsworth House in Derbyshire. Remember that Shepherdess had been linked with Poussin in our elaborate ciphered message. But the Poussin shepherds were not all that I found at Shugborough. The message had also referred to Teniers and No Temptation. This had always seemed to be a link with Tenier's many versions of the Temptation of St. Anthony. But No Temptation was odd. However, at Shugborough there was one more copy of a 17th century painting, and it was a copy of a Teniers. Not the Temptation of St. Anthony, but St. Anthony and St. Jerome, the only St. Anthony theme in which he is not being tempted. Pas de tentation, no temptation. And as confirmation, in the background there is a shepherdess. Shepherdess, no temptation, Poussin and Teniers hold the key. Coincidence can only go so far. So Shugborough confirms the links between the painters and their works which were indicated by the ciphered message. The Poussin has provided us with many more tangible clues than the Teniers, so I concentrated on that. Remember, when we looked at the real landscape, how there was a mountain slope behind the tomb which is not there in the painting. But a line of cloud seems to match that slope. I had to go back to Paris to find out if Poussin had originally painted the mountain and then altered it to cloud. I realized that the X-ray pictures at the Louvre would reveal the truth. And the truth was disappointing. There are no basic alterations in the picture. But a tiny detail in another part of the painting, which only the X-rays could reveal, suddenly caught my eye. One would expect a picture to be built up from background to foreground. One expects that Poussin would have painted first the landscape, then sketched in the tomb, and then the foreground figures. But here he seems to have done something strange, and it doesn't show on the surface painting. Look at this shepherd's head. Now that we can see the underpainting, it is clear that the line of the stick held by the shepherd is cut off by the line of the top of the tomb. Clearly the staff must have been painted first. Why? One does not expect an artist to work from the foreground details backwards. Having noticed that the staff appeared to have been painted first, I examined it more closely, to find that the line of the shepherd's arm divides the stick exactly in two. This precise half-staff measurement is exactly repeated on the other staff, and here, and here, and in fact in dozens of other places. A curious geometry was beginning to show itself. I needed expert advice. Professor Cornford of the Royal College of Art undertook to analyse the picture.
As I worked on the painting, it did seem to me to become evident that there was present in the geometry of it the figure of the regular pentagon.
This was a complete surprise. Why? Such a system had been discarded centuries before Poussin's time, so what could the pentagon signify?
That is a very ancient symbol, which basically has been regarded as both good magic for protection against evil spirits, hence the use of the five-pointed star by people doing magical operations in order to exclude, I think, unwanted spiritual presences from what they're doing. It was also the cult symbol of an ancient religion dating back to 600 BC in South Italy, presided over by, or originated by, Pythagoras. When I saw this from a little way back, I did seem to detect somewhere in this area the presence of what could be a regular pentagon and the angles of the pentagon, and this prompted me to look into the question of what shape Poussin had chosen as the rectangle for his painting.
Moving away from my measurements, he established convincing evidence for pentagonal geometry, as the format chosen by Poussin is exactly that rectangle which bears a very particular relationship with the regular pentagon. It is one of the rectangles whose proportions relate to the golden section, the harmonious division of a picture much used by classical painters. That golden section division here defines the position of the shepherdess. Painters of Poussin's time used the golden section as one of the ways of subdividing the area of the canvas. Professor Cornford was not surprised to find this system of harmonious division, but what startled him was the pentagon, and that it was not within the painting, but governed its form from without. And this could only result from Poussin's choosing a precise ratio of height to width for his canvas. The next step was to join the opposite points of the pentagon. This makes a five-pointed star. Every old master painting previously analysed by Professor Cornford had conformed to straightforward subdivisions of a rectangle. The Berger d'Arcadie was quite different. The centre of its governing pentagon is simply found. The pivotal centre is the mind of the shepherdess. She dominates the picture as the pentagon dominates her position, defined by a system which for some reason Poussin had resurrected from the past to bring into the 17th century.
I was surprised that this should be so, because I would have expected Poussin to have associated himself with the Renaissance philosophy in this matter, rather than to have used the older method. I was also surprised at the degree to which it was possible to conform with both methods simultaneously, almost like a musician writing in two keys at once and making them both harmonize, extraordinary feat of virtuosity. And I was frankly surprised at what seemed to me the quite staggering rigorousness and exactitude with which Poussin seemed, to me anyway, to have observed both of the constructions that he used, but rather particularly the second one that I've mentioned.
he found that the layout was controlled by a 5-pointed star, a pentacle. This surprised him, but he wasn't as surprised as I was. The pentacle had already surfaced in the parchment. This figure of the 5-pointed star had been growing in importance throughout the investigation. It had made yet another unexpected appearance when I'd been checking on the village's patron saint, Mary Magdalene. It seems that the medieval Kabbalists had given her, as her symbol in the heavens, the planet Venus. And as Venus revolves in her orbit, she makes 5 alignments with the Earth and the Sun. 5 regular and predictable alignments which describe a 5-pointed star. Venus is the only planet to draw a regular geometrical figure across the sky. It was intriguing to find that it was the very figure which had been surfacing in my researches. Now, Professor Cornford ended his report by saying that the shepherds of Arcadia was unexpectedly stressing the pentacle. Why not look in the landscape, he said. And that's when everything began to fall into place. At first, I couldn't think how to begin looking for a 5-pointed star in the landscape. But then I realized that the figure was made up of 5 overlapping triangles. A triangle should be easier to find. But a triangle of what? Perhaps there were 3 related things in the landscape. And then I remembered that the treasure story was revolving around 3 castles: Rennes-le-Château, Blanchefort, and Bézu. And there it was. But what about the rest of the pentacle? And amazingly, the map already marked the other 2 points. There were no castles, nothing to mark the other 2 points of the pentacle, but each of them was on a natural mountain. Spot heights, the highest places in the locality. This was phenomenal. 5 natural mountain peaks laid out in a perfect 5-pointed star shape. The odds against this had to be literally astronomical.